Oh, are we having John or Jeremiah starting us off? They usually welcome everyone to the Clearwater Baha'i community. Jeremiah, or?
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
No, and then we usually start with a prayer. So I just wanted to remind what we typically normally do, but welcome everybody. So wonderful to be with you again.
This was the prayer for the southern states, right?
Yes.
Give me a second. I have to pull it up.
Good to have everyone back and look forward to another great session. It's going to be great today.
Do you guys see it?
Yes.
Oh my God, thou seest me in my lowliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the breath of the Holy Spirit? Help me to triumph by the host of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and a light into atoms and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all people, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent and the doer of whatsoever thou willest.
Thank you so much, and welcome back, everybody. Okay, so just to recap, dear friends, we are marching along through America and the Most Great Peace right now. Our overall arc is the study of the advent of divine justice, and we were carrying on studying the advent of divine justice till we got to paragraph 16. And in paragraph 16, the beloved guardian of addresses the early American Baha'i community, the history, the challenges, the tests, the trials, the tribulations, and the sufferings that early American Baha'i community had to go through. And I wanted to segue into America and the Most Great Peace to give a fuller picture from the point of 1893, when the first intimations by Reverend Jessup, all the way to 1933, that 4-decade period which the beloved guardian wrote in America and the Most Great Peace. And then once we finish that study of America and the Most Great Peace, we'll jump back into paragraph 16. So then you'll see how it is all tied together. So we're carrying on our study of America and the Most Great Peace. And in our last session that was so well presented by our dear friend Jeremiah, in that session, it was very hard content to present. And in our last session, he covered the tests and trials during that decade. It was covenant breakers, as well as individuals that were writing papers and books, such as Valtrasky and Wilson, to attack the faith. And so the faith was being challenged during that period, 1903 to 1913. So this was a period of tests and trials to this early American Baha'i community. And also, our dear beloved master, His Holiness Abdul Bahar, sent his 4 chosen messengers. And in our last session, our dear Jeremiah talked about these 4 chosen messengers to really bring the unity of this community together after the defection of Ibrahim Khairullah. So this was really a time and place of trial, tests, as well as the hand of Abdul Bahar coming to and bringing the unity to this community. So it was a very interesting period. And I also mentioned Mirza Abul Fazayel Bolpaghani, the great Baha'i scholar. He was sent as the foremost ambassador to bring the unity of the faith together. And what an incredible soul. We learned about it in last session, and how he came and he had written a book called Baha'i Proofs. And that was to defend the faith against attacks of the faith, and this was on the call of Abdul Baha. So this book really was a challenge to anyone attacking the faith, and really laid it down and said, this is what the Baha'i faith stands for. So this was an incredible time from 1903 to 1913. So now we're going to march into the next decade, 1913 to 1923. So this is in the early American Baha'i history, okay? So now I've set the stage, as they say, for this time period. Okay, and as always, my dear friends, if you have a question, comment, suggestion, jump in, okay? This is your class. So this is we're in American, the Most Great Peace. This is the time period 1913 to 1923, okay? This was an incredible period of time. Not only now World War I was coming to be, this was also the time of tablets of the divine plan, as well as you all know, 1921, the passing of the beloved master, His Holiness Abdul Baha. So so wonderful also to study this period of time in conjunction as we're in the centenary year of his passing. So this is very important to study his life. His meaning His Holiness Abdul Baha. And so during this period of time, 1913 to 1923, this was the beloved guardian talks about this decade. So we're going to first read it as always, and then we'll get into a deep analysis of the text. Okay, so I'll read some selections and then pass it off to our dear friends for reading, okay? So this is paragraph 28 of American, the Most Great Peace, and this is one of the world order letters. So if you are wondering, where is this letter, American, the Most Great Peace? It's in the world order of Baha'u'llah, okay? There you go. So this is paragraph 28. The implications of such a parting message could not long remain unrevealed to Abdul Baha's initiated disciples. No sooner had he concluded his long and arduous journey across the American and European continents than the tremendous happenings to which he had alluded began to be made manifest. A conflict such as he had predicted severed for a time all means of communication with those on whom he had come to place such implicit trust and from whom he was expecting so much in return. The wintry desolation, with all its havoc and carnage, pursued during 4 years its relentless course, while he, repairing to the quiet solitude of his residence in the close neighborhood of Baha'u'llah's hallowed shrine, continued to communicate his thoughts and wishes to those whom he had left behind, and on whom he had conferred the unique tokens of his favor. In the immortal tablets which, in the long hours of his communion with his dearly beloved friends, he was moved to reveal, he unfolded to their eyes his conception of their spiritual destiny, his plan for the mission he wished them to undertake. The seeds his hands had sown, he was now watering with that same care, that same love and patience, which had characterized his previous endeavors whilst he was laboring in their midst. Suresh John, if you could.
The clarion call which Abdul Baha had raised was the signal for an outburst of renewed activity, which alike in the motives it inspired and the forces it set in motion, America had scarcely experienced, lending an unprecedented impetus to the work which the enterprising ambassadors of the message of Baha'u'llah had initiated in distant lands. This mighty movement has continued to spread until the present day, has gathered momentum as it extended its ramifications over the surface of the globe, and will continue to accelerate its march until the last wishes of its original promoter are completely fulfilled.
Thank you, Suresh. Scott, if you could read this one.
Sure. Forsaking home, kindred, friends, and a position, a handful of men and women, fired with a zeal and confidence which no human agency can kindle, arose to carry out the mandate which Abdul Baha had issued. Sailing northward as far as Alaska, pushing on to the West Indies, penetrating the South American continent to the banks of the Amazon and across the Andes to the southernmost ends of the Argentine Republic, pressing on westward into the island of Tahiti and beyond it to the Australian continent, and still beyond it as far as New Zealand and Tasmania. These intrepid heralds of the faith of Baha'u'llah have succeeded by their very acts in setting to the present generation of their fellow believers throughout the East an example which they may well emulate. Headed by their illustrious representative, who ever since the call of Abdul Baha was raised has been twice around the world and is still with marvelous courage and fortitude enriching the matchless record of her services. These men and women have been instrumental in extending to a degree as yet unsurpassed in Baha'i history the sway of Baha'u'llah's universal dominion.
Excellently read, Scott. Thank you. In the face of almost insurmountable obstacles, they have succeeded in most of the countries through which they have passed or in which they have resided in proclaiming the teachings of their faith, in circulating its literature, in defending its cause, in laying the basis of its institutions, and in reinforcing the number of its declared supporters. It would be impossible for me to unfold in this short compass the tale of such heroic actions, nor can any tribute of mine do justice to the spirit which has enabled these standard bearers of the religion of God to win such laurels and to confer such distinction on the generation to which they belong. Jeremiah, could you read this one?
The cause of Baha'u'llah had by that time encircled the globe. Its light, born in the darkest Persia, had been carried successively to the European, the African, and the American continents, and was now penetrating the heart of Australia, encompassing thereby the whole earth with a girdle of shining glory. The share which such worthy, such stout-hearted disciples have had in brightening the last days of Abdul Baha's earthly life, he alone has truly recognized and can sufficiently estimate. The unique and eternal significance of such accomplishments, the labors of the rising generation will assuredly reveal. Their memory, its works, will befittingly preserve and extol. How deep a satisfaction Abdul Baha must have felt while conscious of the approaching hour of his departure, as he witnessed the first fruits of the international services of these heroes of his father's faith. To their keeping, he had committed a great and goodly heritage. In the twilight of his earthly life, he could rest content in the serene assurance that such able hands could be relied upon to preserve its integrity and exalt its virtue.
Thank you, Jeremiah. The passing of Abdul Baha, so sudden in the circumstances which caused it, so dramatic in its consequences, could neither impede the operation of such a dynamic force, nor obscure its purpose. Those fervid appeals, embodied in the will and testament of a departed master, could not but confirm its aim, define its character, and reinforce the promise of its ultimate success. out of the pangs of anguish, which his bereaved followers have suffered, amid the heat and dust which the attacks launched by a sleepless enemy had precipitated, the administration of Baha'u'llah's invincible faith was born, the potent energies released through the ascension of the center of his covenant, crystallized into this supreme, this infallible organ for the accomplishment of a divine purpose. The will and testament of Abdul Baha unveiled its character, reaffirmed its basis, supplemented its principles, asserted its indispensability, and enumerated its chief institutions. With that self-same spontaneity which had characterized her response to the message proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, America had now arisen to espouse the cause of the administration, which the will and testament of his son had unmistakably established. It was given to her, and to her alone, in the turbulent years following the revelation of so momentous a document, to become the fearless champion of that administration, the pivot of its newborn institutions, and the leading promoter of its influence. To their Persian brethren, who in the heroic age of the faith had won the crown of martyrdom, the American believers, forerunners of its golden age, were now worthily succeeding, bearing in their turn the palm of a hard-won victory. The unbroken record of their illustrious deeds had established beyond the shadow of a doubt their preponderating share in shaping the destinies of their faith. In a world writhing with pain and declining into chaos, this community, the vanguard of the liberating forces of Baha'u'llah, succeeded in the years following Abdul Baha's passing in raising high above the institutions established by its sister communities, east and west, what may well constitute the chief pillar of that future house, a house which posterity will regard as the last refuge of a tottering civilization. Suresh John?
In the prosecution of their task, neither the whisperings of the treacherous nor the virulent attacks of their avowed enemies were allowed to deflect them from their high purpose or to undermine their faith in the sublimity of their calling. The agitation provoked by him who in his incessant and sordid pursuit of earthly riches would have, but for Abdul Baha's warning, sullied the fair name of their faith, had left them, in the main, undisturbed. Schooled by tribulation and secured within the stronghold of their fast, evolving institutions, they scorned his insinuations, and by their unswerving loyalty were able to shatter his hopes.
Carry on.
They refused to allow any consideration of the admitted prestige and past services of his father and of his associates to weaken their determination to ignore entirely the person whom Abdul Baha had so emphatically condemned. The veiled attacks with which a handful of deluded enthusiasts subsequently sought in the pages of their periodical to check the growth and blight the prospects of an infant administration had likewise failed to achieve their purpose. The attitude which a besotted woman later on assumed, her ludicrous assertions, her boldness in flouting the will of Abdul Baha and in challenging its authenticity, and her attempts to subvert its principles were again powerless to produce the slightest breach in the ranks of its valiant upholders.
Keep going. Let's finish this paragraph. Thank you, Suresh.
Sure. The treacherous schemes which the ambition of a perfidious and still more recent enemy has devised, and through which he is still striving to deface Abdul Baha's noble handiwork and corrupt its administrative principles, are being once more completely frustrated. These intermittent and abortive attempts on the part of its assailants to force the surrender of the newly built stronghold of the faith, its defenders have from the very beginning utterly disdained. No matter how fierce the assaults of the enemy or skillful his stratagem, they have refused to yield one jot or one tittle of their cherished convictions. His insinuations and clamor they have consistently ignored, the motives which animated his actions, the methods he steadily pursued, the precarious privileges he seemed momentarily to enjoy they could not but despise, thriving for a time through the devices which their scheming minds had conceived and supported by the ephemeral advantages which fame, ability, or fortune can confer. These notorious exponents of corruption and heresy have succeeded in protruding for a time their ugly features, only to sink as rapidly as they had risen into the mire of an ignominious end.
Excellent. Thank you, Suresh. And Scott, if you could read the last paragraph.
Sure.
Thank you.
From the midst of these afflictive trials, reminiscent in some of their aspects of the violent storm that had accompanied the birth of the faith in their native land, the American believers had again triumphantly emerged, their course undeflected, their fame unsullied, their heritage unimpaired. A series of magnificent accomplishments, each more significant than the previous, were to shed increasing luster on an already illustrious record. In the dark years immediately following Abdul Baha's ascension, their deeds shone with a radiance that made them the object of the envy and the admiration of the less privileged among their brethren. The entire community, untrammeled and supremely confident, was rising to a great and glorious opportunity. The forces that had motivated its birth, that had assisted in its rise, were now accelerating its growth in a manner and with such rapidity that neither the pangs of a worldwide sorrow nor the unceasing convulsions of a distracted age could paralyze its efforts or retard its march.
So there we are, dear friends. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Surjan. Thank you, Jeremiah. Thank you, all the readers. So there we are, paragraphs 28 through 35. Now here we're addressing the beloved master has gone on his epic journeys going through Europe and America. And that's what it says at the very opening. No sooner had he concluded his long and arduous journey across America and the European continents, then what happened? Conflict happened. World War I, right? So a conflict such as he had predicted, severed for a time all means of communication with those on whom he had come to place such implicit trust and from whom he was expecting so much. So this caused carnage, havoc and carnage. It was wintry desolation pursued during 4 years its relentless course. So they were cut off for at least 4 years during this period of time. And also this echoes also what the beloved guardian talks about in Advent of Divine Justice. The impending crises and chaos that is coming, because that was written in 1938. 9 months later, World War II started, right? So it's a very similar echoing there, and also the crises that will be faced coming up. So he had left behind on whom he had conferred the unique tokens of his favor. Now, what is he talking about? In these immortal tablets, which in the long hours of his communion with his dearly beloved friends, he was moved to reveal. So these are the tablets of the divine plan, right? He unfolded to their eyes his conception of their spiritual destiny, his plan for the mission he wished them to undertake. The seeds his hands had sown, he was now watering with that same care, that same love and patience, which had characterized his previous endeavors. So now the beloved master had unveiled and revealed these tablets of the divine plan, specifically for the North American Baha'i community, and to go out and go pioneering, really massively reach new horizons in the teaching work. And so this was really for not only the United States and Canada and Greenland and all the places, and to really go out and go to the highest levels of teaching. Paragraph 29, we're going to recap. I'm just touching on these now, to help jog your memory as we went through them. The clarion call which Abdul Baha had raised was the signal for an outburst of renewed activity. So this is in direct relation to Tablets of the Divine Plan. So this clarion call, clear, loud call which Abdul Baha had raised, was for an outburst of renewed activity, which alike in the motives it inspired and the forces it set in motion, America had scarcely experienced, lending an unprecedented impetus. This is so cool. This is an unprecedented impetus to the work which the enterprising ambassadors of the message of Baha'u'llah. This is a very important. Every one of us, every single one of us, as we call ourselves a Baha'i, should consider ourselves an ambassador of the message of Baha'u'llah. So we should be taking that message anywhere and everywhere we go with being like an ambassador. And they had initiated into distant lands because they were pioneering. This mighty movement has continued to spread until the present day and has gathered momentum as it extended its ramifications over the surface of the globe and will continue to accelerate its march until the last wishes of its original promoter are completely fulfilled. Then we entered to paragraph 30. Now, paragraph 30 continued. Now, the beloved guardian surveying this period. Remember, he's surveying the period 1913 to 1923. And this was also a period of the friends really taking up the pioneering and going to all these different places. And one of the great ladies is mentioned here, namely Martha Root, and talking about her travels. Abdul Baha was, here it says right here, headed by their illustrious representative, right? Who is their illustrious representative? Whoever since the call of Abdul Baha was raised has been twice round the world and is still with marvelous courage and fortitude, enriching the matchless record of her services. These men and women have been instrumental in extending to a degree as yet unsurpassed in Baha'i history, the sway of Baha'u'llah's universal dominion. So these are incredible souls. Leonora Armstrong going to the South American continent, to the Duns, Hyde Dunn and Clara Dunn going to New Zealand and Australia. This is mentioned not by name here, but obviously by deeds, by going to New Zealand and there and talking about the Leonora Armstrong going to the South American continent, and Martha Root traveling the globe twice. These are the souls, that incredible souls the beloved guardian is highlighting here. In the face of almost insurmountable obstacles. And here I want to pause for 2 seconds and let you know. Here the beloved guardian is highlighting two things. He is highlighting the obstacles, the challenges, the tests, the trials, the tribulations, the sufferings of this early American Baha'i community. In the last decade, you saw all the attacks and trials that this early American community has had to face. And now, His Holiness Abdul Baha has not only visited this entire region for 239 days, but then he's also revealed these tablets of the divine plan, pretty much saying, get up and go teach. And now we're seeing an amazing response, but there has also incredible, insurmountable obstacles this community has had to face during this period too. And so this is not only the aspect of crises, but victories. And so this community constantly goes through crises, but this is a community that not only is so strong and overtakes these crises and makes them into victories. So this is a very important, you will constantly see how the beloved guardian in his style lays out these crises, these challenges, these obstacles in the path of this community, but then he constantly shows this community has overcome these obstacles. This community has overcome these challenges, and these are the victories. So I just wanted to touch on that so you keep that afresh in your mind. So in the face of almost insurmountable obstacles, they have succeeded. Crisis victory, right? In most of the countries through which they have passed or in which they have resided, in proclaiming the teachings of their faith, in circulating its literature, in defending its cause, in laying the basis of its institutions, and in reinforcing the number of its declared supporters. So I want you to remember this section of this paragraph, paragraph 30. So when we get to Advent to Divine Justice, and why I say remember this, because these are the main key points for a pioneer. What is the role of a pioneer? And in Advent to Divine Justice, the Beloved Guardian, as the second part of the first 7-year plan, the second part of the first 7-year plan was to go forth and to go and open the countries of Central America and South America and establish spiritual assemblies in those regions. And so this, one of the, so when the latter half of Advent of Divine Justice is really regarding the pioneering goals and the pioneering work for the second part of the first 7-year plan. So in this part, the Beloved Guardian, in this part of paragraph 30, is outlining what is the goals of a pioneering. It is what? Proclaiming the teachings of the faith, circulating its literature, defending its cause, in laying the basis of its institutions, and in reinforcing the number of its declared supporters. So those are really, in essence, what it is to go pioneer to do. It would be impossible. Now here the Beloved Guardian, shows his loving humility. It would be impossible for me to unfold in this short compass the tale of such heroic actions. I'm sure the only person that could truly do it would be the Beloved Guardian. But in this, here he is saying it would be impossible even for him to do. He's saying in such a short compass, the tale of such heroic actions, nor can any tribute of mine do justice to the spirit which has enabled these standard bearers of the religion of God to win such laurels and to confer such distinction on the generation to which it belongs. So again, here's another title of the American Baha'i community, standard bearers of the religion of God. So as this is a title that as American Baha'i community, we have an appellation the Beloved Guardian has given us, standard bearers of the religion of God. Okay, then we march into paragraph 31. Now here the Beloved Guardian is tying this early American Baha'i community to the cradle of the faith in the opening stanza. It says the cause of Baha'u'llah had by that time encircled the globe. So by the time of 1913 to 1923, this little cause that had started out from the point of 1844 with the meeting of the Mullah Hussein, the Blessed Bob, or now we're at the point of 1913 to 1923. Now the cause of Baha'u'llah has encircled the whole globe. Its light, born in darkest Persia. That's a very sad way to describe Persia, but it's a reality. Darkest Persia had been carried successively to the European, the African, the American continents, and was now penetrating the heart of Australia. And this is through the Duns. Now this, the cause is penetrating the heart of Australia, encompassing thereby the whole earth with a girdle of shining glory. The share which such worthy, such stout-hearted disciples have had in brightening the last days of Abdul Baha's earthly life. He alone has truly recognized and can sufficiently estimate. So it was the heroism, the stout-heartedism, the love and the desire to pioneer, to teach. These qualities were what brought joy and happiness to the heart of Abdul Baha. See, these disciples had in brightening the last days of Abdul Baha's earthly life. Their heroism, every time he heard news of Martha Root's incredible adventures, going from one place to another, every time he heard of the incredible sacrifices of Leonora Armstrong, or he heard of the incredible endeavors of Hy Dunn and Clara Dunn and all of these incredible souls, his heart was radiant with joy and happiness. He alone has truly recognized and can sufficiently estimate. It is the unique and eternal significance of such accomplishments, the labors of the rising generation. It's interesting, the beloved guardian uses the labors. Labor is work, and that's what we got to be doing. We got to be laboring in this field. The labors of this rising generation will assuredly reveal their memory, its works will be fittingly preserved and extolled. How deep a satisfaction Abdul Baha must have felt while conscious of the approaching hour of his departure, as he witnessed the first fruits of the international services of these heroes of his father's faith. And now here's the beloved guardian pondering. Remember, he wrote this in 1933. He's pondering at how Abdul Baha, the beloved master, must have felt. So the beloved guardian is writing, how deep a satisfaction. So Abdul Baha must have felt satisfaction, happiness, joy, that now these heroes, these incredible stout-hearted pioneers were going out into the field. And see, this is the beloved guardian writing. He says, how deep a satisfaction Abdul Baha must have felt while conscious of the approaching hour of his departure. So he knew that he was going to pass away. Abdul Baha knew he was going to pass, but now his legacy, per se, he had injected such energy, enthusiasm, and penetrating power into these tablets of the divine plan that it created a new race of men, an energy impulse into these souls, that they were just alive and they poured their energies across the whole world. So this is something that, this is the beloved guardian, how deep a satisfaction must have generated into the heart of Abdul Baha. To their keeping, he had committed a great and goodly heritage. In the twilight of his earthly life, he could rest content. That makes us so happy. You know, he had done so much, but now because of the heroism, the incredible sacrifices of these incredible American souls, the heart of Abdul Baha during the last moments of his life, per se, he could rest content in the serene assurance that such able hands could be relied upon to preserve its integrity and exalt its virtue. And this paragraph 32, I hope this is helping to bring it together as I'm going through it a little bit more in detail. And then we're going to get to, there are some terminologies and that the beloved guardian mentioned. We'll really get into those coming up. So paragraph 32 now gets to, we're now at the year 1921. So we're covering 1913 all the way to 1923. So in this point now, we're in 1921, the passing of the beloved master, Abdul Baha. So sudden in the circumstances which caused it, so dramatic in its consequences, could neither impede the operation of such a dynamic force, nor obscure its purpose. Those fervid appeals embodied in the will and testament of a departed master could not but confirm its aim, define its character, and reinforce the promise of its ultimate success. So crisis, victory. There again, every paragraph, you see the crisis that's so suddenly brought on by the passing of the beloved master, so sudden in the circumstances which caused it, so dramatic in its consequences. But that crisis, even so dramatic, it could not impede the operation that had been created by the forces of the will of Abdul Baha, the will of His Holiness Baha'u'llah, this newly founded administration that was growing and crystallizing. And so, and the energies that had been impulsed into this American Baha'i community by the revealing of the tablets of the divine plan. It is literally like the hand of the beloved master when he came here. he, with his own hands, he not only cleaned the soil of the spiritual soil of this area, but with his own hands, he planted the seeds of faith in the hearts of the believers. And once he left after 239 days, through the revealing of the tablets of the divine plan, that seed sprouted and germinated, as they say, and suddenly new energies emerged. And now, for the first time, this faith was suddenly flourishing. It was like a new harvest. And this was an incredible time. And so but remember, there were weeds everywhere too. In this beautiful land, there were weeds, and these weeds were trying to attack this new growth. And these weeds we're going to come up to that paragraph. These weeds were trying to attack the faith of God. But you will see that this faith was strong and were not impacted by these forces of darkness, these individuals that were trying to usurp power and take the faith into their own hands. So here it is. It was the power of this will and testament, that Abdul Baha's will and testament, that maintained the integrity of the covenant. And this is a document that every faithful Baha'i should study, and restudy. And also, another document that we at the Crimson Academy has created is called the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. And that course, it will be coming out very shortly. So that one shows the cohesiveness of the entire plan of God, coming from the Blessed Baal to Baha'u'llah to Abdul Baha to the administrative order, and showing that this is one unfolding revelation. So that is another key document, the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. That was also, I believe it's the sixth world order letter, the sixth, because there are 7 world order letters. So that is another, that was written in 1934. This is written in 1933, the American and Most Great Peace. So moving on, this was a turbulent period. Out of the pangs of anguish, remember, this is turbulent period, 1921, 1922, the Baha'i community reeling from the loss of the life of their master, the Blessed Abdul Baha. They've lost their spiritual father, per se. And so out of the pangs of anguish, which his bereaved followers have suffered, amid the heat and dust which the attacks launched by a sleepless enemy had precipitated. So every time they saw an opportunity to attack, they attacked. Now the beloved master had passed away. The covenant breakers started, hey, good opportunity. Let's try to seize power. Sleepless enemy means that they're always awake, ready to attack. The administration of Baha'u'llah's invincible faith was born. The potent energies released through the ascension of the center of his covenant crystallized into the supreme, this infallible organ for the accomplishment of a divine purpose, the will and testament of Abdul Baha. This is so cool. I can't stress this enough. Now, this crisis, this great crisis moment in the history of our faith, when the passing of the beloved master, it could have torn the whole faith apart if it wasn't for the will and testament of Abdul Baha. Now, so what happened is the brilliance of this covenant that this has come, the will and testament of Abdul Baha, those fresh attacks by the sleepless enemy started precipitating. And so the attacks started coming, but through the will and testament of Abdul Baha, which was in his own hand. So it was indisputable. You could not dispute the authenticity of the will and testament of Abdul Baha. But people obviously tried, and you were going to see who these individuals were, and they failed miserably. But it was indisputable that this authentic document, the will and testament of Abdul Baha, clearly stated that the beloved guardian the guardianship, as well as in the future to come, the supreme body, Universal House of Justice, is right there in the will and testament of Abdul Baha, the successorship of the will and testament of Abdul Baha. Also, the importance of the Baha'is to stay strong in the covenant, to eschew covenant breakers. It's all there in the will and testament, and that they have to turn towards the guardian and the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi. It's all there in the will and testament of Abdul Baha. So very clear, very, and it's all there in the will and testament. So it preserved the unity of this new fledgling faith that kept its from all forms of schism and fraction that this community could easily gone through if it wasn't for this charter document of the world order of Baha'u'llah, the will and testament. So this document, it enumerated its chief institutions. So which institution came into being from this document? Namely, the National Spiritual Assemblies emerged from this charter document. Also, the guardianship formally emerged from this charter document. And that is in conjunction with the Universal House of Justice, which was formally mentioned in the Kitab Aqdas, the most holy book. So now we have these two institutions, namely the guardianship and the Universal House of Justice, these two lights that would guide humanity in the will and testament of Abdul Baha. So this was an incredible document unveiled that preserved the sanctity and of the covenant and protected the faith from schism. So let us move on. Okay, we read this part. Then end of paragraph 33. Here, this is literally writing to the Persians, to their Persian brethren, who in the heroic age of the faith had won the crown of martyrdom. Because imagine, like, you're being Persian and you've been in the cradle of the faith, your families had sacrifices and everything. But here the beloved guardian is just writing laurels and praises to these American Bahá'ís, right? So he's writing to the Persians. He's saying, to your Persian brethren, who in the heroic age of the faith had won the crown of martyrdom. Now, the beloved guardian is saying the American believers are the forerunners of its golden age, were now worthily succeeding, bearing in their turn the palm of a hard-won victory. So it's literally how I foresee it. I see it in my little head. Sometimes I have imagery. I see it as one of those races where the baton is passed from one hand to the next, relay races, as they say. And in this sense, the Persian brethren and in the heroic age had done their part. And now the baton has passed. Not that the Persians do not have a role or per se anymore, but now the American Baha'i community here, the baton has been passed, and here the American believers, the forerunners of its golden age, were now worthily succeeding, bearing in their turn the palm of a hard-won victory. This unbroken record of illustrious deeds, that makes me think, dear friends, each one of you are light. So your record should be light. Your life should be light. You should have an illustrious record. Your deeds should be light. Illustrious deeds had established beyond the shadow of a doubt their preponderating share in shaping the destinies of their faith. So the preponderating share of the workload of the pioneering work fell on the American believers. Preponderating means the great amount of the share. They were in the vanguard of the liberating forces of Baha'u'llah and succeeded in the years following Abdul Baha's passing in raising high above the institutions established by its sister communities, East and West, what may well constitute the chief pillar of that future house, a house which posterity will regard as the last refuge of a tottering civilization. So here, dear friends, I am now tying this closing part of paragraph 33 to paragraph 16 of Advent to Divine Justice. If you recall, if you have your Advent handy, paragraph 16, it says that at the very close of it, let me pull it up. I'm just going to stop sharing and I'll see if I can pull up. Actually, that would be tough for me to do. But in the closing part of paragraph 16, it says communities in East and West, that this community, the American Baha'i community, stands apart from those communities East and West, and that Abdul, it's raising high above the institution established by its sister communities in East and West. And if, Scott, you have it handy, you could read it aloud, that last part in paragraph 16, where it mentions the East and the West, because I see you have your Advent there. Or if any of my dear friends have it handy, it's because that is an interesting tie-in to paragraph 33 that we're been studying very deeply here.
Sure. Such a community in less than half a century and unaided by any of its sister communities, whether in the East or in the West, has by virtue of the celestial potency with which an all-loving master has abundantly endowed it, lent an impetus to the onward march of the cause it has espoused, which the combined achievements of its co-religionists in the West have failed to rival.
There you go. Beautifully read. So that's in Advent to Divine Justice, 1938. So it's literally the same language, that this community, unaided by any of its sister communities, whether in the East or in the West, has achieved ascendancy over those other communities. So this is that was in Advent to Divine Justice. Thank you very much, Scott. And so there we go. Moving on. Then we entered into paragraph 34. And then this is a longish paragraph. And this paragraph now starts talking, because before we were talking about the victories, right? Now this is also crisis again. In this period of time from 1913 to 23, there was also crises, challenges, and on this early American Baha'i community. So in the prosecution of their task, neither the whisperings of the treacherous nor the virulent attacks of their avowed enemies were allowed to deflect them. So the challenges, nothing would have deflected this early American Baha'i community from their high purpose or to undermine their faith. In the sublimity of their calling, the agitation provoked by him who in his incessant and sordid pursuit of earthly riches would have, but for Abdul Baha's warning, sullied the fame, the fair name of their faith, had left them in the main undisturbed. Schooled by tribulation and secure within the stronghold of their fast evolving institutions, they scorned his insinuations and by their unswerving loyalty were able to shatter his hopes. So this is a direct address to a certain individual that we're going to talk about later. Yes, Scott, you have a hand, please.
No, I was going to ask who this individual, I think I know who it is, but it kind of looked like it was a certain individual. I wanted to make sure that we brought up.
Yeah, so this is a specific individual that was who was attracted to the pursuit of earthly riches and fame, was trying to use the good name of the faith for his own right and his own profiteering, but literally creating his own faith per se. And it was the unswerving loyalty of the early American Baha'i community that just crushed all his hopes, and he ended in despair. And so that was, we'll talk about that. Then carrying on paragraph 34. So here the beloved guardian is continuing, showing these crises. They refused to allow any consideration of the admitted prestige and past services of his father and of his associates, to weaken their determination to ignore entirely the person whom Abdul Baha had so emphatically condemned. The veiled attacks, and this is very common, how covenant breakers attack the faith. They do it veiled. So it may look, it's not a direct attack. They might do it very surreptitiously. And so it might even look at a time like, they may look like a friend, but they tie truth with falsehood. And so you do, this is called veiled attacks. The veiled attacks, with which a handful of deluded enthusiasts subsequently sought in the pages of their periodical to check the growth and blight the prospects of an infant administration, had likewise failed to achieve their purpose. So there was also another periodical to attack the faith, and they were circulating this periodical to undermine the principles, and also say this faith is very numerically small, insignificant, and to per se that this faith is not something to focus on. So that's why they were trying to check the growth and blight the prospects of an infant administration. So they were trying to circulate a periodical, but even that failed to achieve its purpose. Then the attitude which a besotted woman, so we're going to talk about who that woman is, later on assumed her ludicrous assertions, her boldness in flouting the will of Abdul Baha, and in challenging its authenticity, and her attempts to subvert its principles were again powerless to produce the slightest breach in the ranks of its valiant upholders. So there was a lady, this woman, and she challenged the authenticity of the will and testament of Abdul Baha. And so we're going to talk about who this lady is, just because we want to clarify what a besotted woman is here in America, the Most Great Peace. Okay, so here the beloved guardian is constantly, one after another, addressed these trials and tribulations that this early American Baha'i community has faced during this period of 1913 to 23. These were treacherous schemes, which the ambition of a perfidious and still more recent enemy has devised, and through which he is still striving to deface Abdul Baha's noble handiwork, corrupt its administrative principles, and are being once more completely frustrated. These intermittent and abortive attempts on the part of its assailants to force the surrender of the newly built stronghold of the faith, its defenders have from the beginning utterly disdained. No matter how fierce the assaults of the enemy or skillful his stratagem, they have refused to yield one jot or one tittle of their cherished convictions. This reminds me, I don't know, dear friends, if you have ever watched Lord of the Rings. When Lord of the Rings came out, I was like big fan. So this reminds me of the dark forces rushing in to attack because they sought an opportunity to take power, but it's the forces of light holding the ground, holding the chief citadel, namely the American Baha'i community, and holding the ground. And like Gandalf the Grey, thou shalt not pass. And, and literally, and the forces of darkness, could not move, or, and this is how, that was very dramatic, when I was using the Lord of the Rings analogy there. But this is how the power of this and faithfulness and stout-heartedness of this early American Baha'i community really championed the faith against these dark forces, these treacherous schemes that were really after the throne of the faith. These insinuations, clamor, they have consistently ignored. So they consistently ignored these insinuations and clamor. The motives which animated his actions, the methods he steadily pursued, the precarious privileges he seemed momentarily to enjoy, they could not but despise. So we're going to find out who is this his insinuations, the clamor they have consistently ignored, thriving for a time through the devices which their scheming minds had conceived and supported by the ephemeral advantages which fame, ability, or fortune can confer. These notorious exponents of corruption and heresy have succeeded in protruding for a time their ugly features, only to sink as rapidly as they had risen into the mire of an ignominious end. So what incredible language here the Guardian is just pouring out. So here the beloved Guardian is now continuing addressing these attacks, these from covenant breakers and also exponents of enemies of the faith, that they're trying to usurp what they perceive as the power of the faith. They think this is this faith has they think Abdul Baha is like how would I describe it, as a pope figure. So they think if they usurp the faith, they suddenly have all the power of the cause. But they don't realize that Abdul Baha is the center of the covenant and the servant of Baha'u'llah in that sense, the servant of the cause, that he actually completely eschewed any aspect of power. And so he was the essence of humility. In fact, I heard this wonderful talk that the only virtue per se that His Holiness Baha'u'llah did not have, because it would go against what it would mean to be a manifestation of God is humility. Because how can a manifestation of God be humble? So the only virtue per se that the supreme manifestation of God did not have was humility. But Abdul Baha was the humility. So in that sense, if Baha'u'llah was the ocean, he had to create something that would capture the ocean. So if he was the mountain, he needed something to capture the ocean. And that was the lowest point, the valley. So literally like the valley, the ocean could be captured, the lowest point. So he was the essence of humility. So all of the powers and essence poured into Abdul Baha. So this really is an incredible creation of Baha'u'llah, is Abdul Baha. So moving on, my dear friends. So now we entered the last paragraph of this period, 1913 to 23. This is per se the concluding paragraph of this period. The beloved Guardian is saying, from the midst of these afflictive trials, crises, right? Afflictive trials, reminiscent in some of their aspects of the violent storm that had accompanied the birth of the faith. So he's now tying it to the past decades that we just covered. Remember with Khairullah and all those others. He's saying reminiscent of that period in their native land. Also the trials that they faced in their native land, in Iran. The American believers had again triumphantly emerged, their course undeflected, their fame unsullied, their heritage unimpaired. So a series of magnificent accomplishments, each more significant than the previous, were to shed increasing luster on an already illustrious record in the dark years immediately following Abdul Baha's ascension. Their deeds shone with a radiance that made them the object of the envy and the admiration of the less privileged among their brethren. The entire community, untrammeled and supremely confident, was rising to a great and glorious opportunity. The forces that had motivated its birth, that had assisted in its rise, were now accelerating its growth in a manner and with such rapidity that neither the pangs of a worldwide sorrow. What is this pangs of a worldwide sorrow? World War I. This is where the period, so pangs of a worldwide sorrow, nor the unceasing convulsions. And we saw how many times this was used in Advent of Divine Justice. Convulsions. We talked about all the period of convulsions leading up to World War II. Of a distracted age could paralyze its efforts or retard its march. So there you are, dear friends. No matter how many trials and tribulations, the attacks from within and from without, this faith continued strong. The energies released by Abdul Baha from his coming to this continent, also the revelation of the tablets of the divine plan produced such intense energies that these great heroes and heroines went forth, pioneering and added to the incredible luster that this continent has. So, and this illustrious record. So there we are. Let's get into just a brief recap, and then we'll go into finding out who some of those characters that the beloved guardian mentioned. Okay. So here, Abdul Baha predicts World War I. He also revealed the tablets of the divine plan during the war. And these tablets unfold his plan for the mission he wished the American Bahá'ís to undertake. This response to the tablets of the divine plan were unprecedented impulse to the teaching work. Now, the beloved guardian mentions that this was an incredible response to the teaching work, but in Advent of Divine Justice, the beloved guardian mentions this, that the teaching work was massively accelerated. He actually mentions Martha Ruth. He mentions Mary and Jack later on, talking about this, the heroism going to Bulgaria. He mentions the Duns going to Australasia. But here's the but. It was not systematized. These were individuals that out of their supreme obedience, love that poured from their hearts, that they were attracted to go forth. But it wasn't a systematized teaching work. Now, the beloved guardian in the first in the 7-year plan, the second part of the 7-year plan, he is calling for a systematized teaching plan to go pioneering. So this is different than the tablets of the divine plan. Tablets of the divine plan was the mandate for teaching. The beloved guardian in 1938, he worked off that and said, this is the mandate. Now let's make it systematized and go forth. So you see, now that's the tie-in per se to Advent of Divine Justice. Now, headed by the illustrious representative who circled the world twice. And this is only at this point in time. She continued circling the globe. So what an incredible lady. So Martha Ruth, she pioneered, she rose heroically to take the faith to the far corners of the earth in response to the tablets of the divine plan. This was a lady, truly, every one of you should study her life. Before the tablets of the divine plan, when it was being unveiled, and as you know, Amatul Bahari Khanum, age 9, she was one of the individuals that was, her name at that time was Mary Maxwell. She was at 9 years old, was one of the individuals there. But before it was even unfinished, not even finished, the unveiling of the tablets of the divine plan, Martha Root was already home and packing. She was already home and packing. She was like, I'm going. Abdul Baha said, go, she's gone. And that is Martha Root. I mean, we need to study her life, her dedication, her commitment, her obedience, and also exemplify that kind of obedience. When a letter from our supreme body comes out, we have that type of, if they call, we go forth. When they say jump, we do it. We don't ask how high or all these other things, right? Or start, oh, I have to, consult on this matter or whatever. Or I need to write a letter back to the supreme body. I'm not sure about this or that. No, they say you go, and that's it. And also with radiant acquiescence, you do not, you go and serve with a, glum face. You serve with joy and happiness. So this type of immediacy, this type of service and sacrifice and rush of the believers to go out, this brought happiness to the heart of His Holiness Abdul Baha in the last years of his life. And truly, what a life of sadness and that the beloved master lived, all through his trials and tribulations, imprisoned, and how many attacks the beloved master went through. But this period of the American Bahá'ís going forth brought so much joy to the heart of the beloved master. The American believers arose to uphold the provisions of his will and testament and championed his administrative order. And so this was another incredible thing, that during the tests that on the early American Baha'i community, and we mentioned just a few, and we're going to elaborate on a few cases, the American believers were stout-hearted and held firm in the covenant, and they championed the administrative order. And the American Baha'is, they raised up the chief pillar of the future house of justice, the last refuge of a tottering civilization, namely the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. So this is the National Spiritual Assembly. Despite new internal attacks against the covenant, the American Baha'is remain untrammeled. So there we are, dear friends. That was my the brief summary. So we've already read all of these. So I'm just going to jump to the red words, as we always do. So not to reread everything we've already read. That would be tiresome. Okay. So I'm going to jump to the red words. Here we are. Okay. And sorry about that 88. Scott was reading. He's like, I don't care. Yeah. So that was from the page number. So here we are. So intrepid heralds. Who are these heralds that the beloved guardian mentions in paragraph 30? And who was this illustrious representative, also mentioned in 30? We mentioned who this one was, but who were also some of these other heralds? So let's look at this. This is talking about New Zealand and Tasmania and some of these other places. So let's go and explore that. So these are some of the first Baha'is to respond to the tablets of the divine plan. These are the heralds. It wasn't until 1937 that Shoghi Effendi formally launched the first 7-year plan to inaugurate Abdul Baha's divine plan. So this is Dr. George Jacob Auger, 1853 to 1927. He was the first to pioneer to Japan, and he was named the 19th disciple of Abdul Baha by Shoghi Effendi. Isn't that cool? This guy he went to Japan, the first to pioneer to Japan. Agnes Baldwin Alexander, what a lady. This is another incredible lady. You should all know their life. She pioneered to Japan and was the first to take the faith to Korea, 1921. And she was named the Hand of the Cause of God in 1957. This is an incredible, incredible lady. And there it is. That's Japan, in case you didn't know what it looked like. Another one is John Bosch, who along with his wife, Louise, pioneered the faith to Tahiti in 1920. That's somewhere I wouldn't mind pioneering to, I wouldn't mind to go to Tahiti. But what an incredible individual John Bosch was. He was, when Abdul Baha was on a car ride. I don't know if you know this story. I served at at Bosch for 1.5 years during my younger years. And there was a story of, I read a lot on John Bosch, and when John was with His Holiness Abdul Baha fell asleep on John Bosch's shoulder. And later, Abdul Baha said, I will also rest on your other shoulder. And so, later on, John was one of the pallbearers during the burial of of His Holiness Abdul Baha. So he literally was on both shoulders of John Bosch. And as you all know, John Bosch provided his property and to the faith, and it was the Geyserville School. And eventually that one was sold, and eventually later the Bosch Baha'i School was acquired. And that property is part of the National Baha'i properties, one of the schools. So also two other individuals, Clara and Hyde Dunn. They pioneered to Australia in 1920, and Hyde was posthumously named a Hand of the Cause of God. Also, Clara Dunn was also named a Hand of the Cause of God. So these are two also incredible souls, and they are mentioned also in Advent to Divine Justice, and we're going to explore their lives also in Advent. So these are two incredible souls. And how can we not mention this great lady? In any time you mention teaching of the cause, this lady needs to be foremost on your mind. So Martha Root, I'm going to read this first, that archetype of Baha'i itinerant teachers. Does anyone know what itinerant means off the top of your head? Itinerant.
Traveling.
There you go. Good job, Scott. Traveling, constantly moving. She is the type that she was the greatest of travel teachers, itinerant teacher, and the foremost hand raised by Baha'u'llah since Abdul Baha's passing. What a lady. So I'm going to ask my dear friend Sarush John, could you read this extract from God Passes By? Here we go.
Sure. The first to arise in the very year the tablets of the divine plan were unveiled in the United States of America, in response to the epoch-making summons voiced in them by Abdul Baha, embarking with unswerving resolve and a spirit of sublime detachment on her world journeys, covering an almost uninterrupted period of 20 years and carrying her 4 times around the globe, in the course of which she traveled 4 times to China and Japan and 3 times to India, visited every important city in South America, transmitted the message of the new day to kings, queens, princes and princesses, presidents of republics, ministers and statesmen, publicists, professors, clergymen, and poets, as well as the vast number of people in various walks of life, and contacted both officially and informally religious congresses, peace societies, Esperanto associations, socialist congresses, theosophical societies, women's clubs, and other kindred organizations. This indomitable soul has, by virtue of the character of her exertions and the quality of the victories she has won, established a record that constitutes the nearest approach to the example set by Abdul Baha himself to his disciples in the course of his journeys throughout the West.
Thank you, thank you. What an incredible lady. What an incredible, incredible, incredible lady Martha Root was. And as you all know, it was through her travels she met Queen Marie of Romania and also Princess Ileana, both of whom encountered the faith through her, and Queen Marie of Romania formally declared her faith to this cause and wrote in the newspapers her open declaration of the faith. And so this was through, and does anybody know off the top of their head what book Martha Root presented to Queen Marie of Romania?
Baha'u'llah and the New Era?
Excellent, Suresh John. Yes, the great book of Esselmont, Baha'u'llah and the New Era. So Baha'u'llah and the New Era was presented to Queen Marie of Romania. And it was such, I urge every one of you to read and reread that great introductory book, as 3.5 chapters are actually the writing of Abdul Baha. And so we should study that book. And so the beloved guardian, Queen Marie of Romania was so overtaken by the power of Esselmont's masterpiece, Baha'u'llah New Era, that she was up all night reading this book. And then the next day, she writes her open-hearted confession, because she had this column called the Queen's Council. And when we get into Advent to Divine Justice again, it's coming up in a few weeks. When we get back into Advent to Divine Justice, we have a whole section on Martha Root, and because there's a section where the Beloved Guardian also mentions Martha Root and her awesomeness in teaching and traveling, and also her effect on Queen Marie of Romania. So she was so moved by Baha'u'llah in the New Era, the message of Baha'u'llah, that she the next day she wrote in her Queen's Council that this advisory column, per se. It was very similar to like a column nowadays, such as Oprah Winfrey would write a column and the whole world would read it and everyone would be like, oh, that's such a good advice. So she had a column that would go in the newspapers called the Queen's Council. And she would write about different subjects, you name it. Literally every other subject. But then when she learned about the faith, it started being much more spiritual subjects, such as God, such as life after death, almost every subheading that is in Baha'u'llah New Era. If you look at the chapter list, on health and life and, all the different topics, she mentions that in her Queen's Council. And it shows how her transformation of inner life was affected by Baha'u'llah New Era. And it's very interesting. But literally the next day after reading Baha'u'llah New Era, she wrote a column, an open declaration. It was published in myriads of newspapers. And so that and then even after that open declaration, people started attacking her. And I even have those, and you will read that later about when we get into Advent to Divine Justice. It's very, very interesting. So also mentioned this illustrious herald that we was also in paragraph, illustrious representative, right? Paragraph 30, it mentions this illustrious representative. So this was this illustrious representative, this American believer. She also has this title as this illustrious herald, American believer, Martha Root. She embraced the faith in 1909. Ironically, today is 9/19, September 9th, September 2000, September 19th. So, that's coincidental. In 1919, she traveled throughout South America teaching the cause. In 1923, she embarked on a teaching journey that kept her out of the United States until 1930. And after a brief respite, she set out again from 1932 to 1936. And her final journey began in May of 1937 when she sailed out of San Francisco, never to return. And in June 1939, she arrived in Honolulu, ravaged by cancer. And this was her passing on September 28th, which is 19 days will be her anniversary of her passing in 1939. She passed away in Honolulu. And as you saw in the next slide, this is her resting place. And this was the memoriam cable from the Beloved Guardian. This is what the Beloved Guardian wrote. Martha's unnumbered admirers throughout Baha'i world lament with me the earthly extinction of her heroic life. Concourse on high, acclaim her elevation to rightful position in galaxy of Baha'i immortals. Posterity will establish her as foremost hand, which Abdul Baha's will has raised up in first Baha'i century. Present generation of her fellow believers recognize her to be the first, finest fruit which the formative age of the faith of Baha'u'llah has as yet produced. Advise hold befitting memorial gathering in temple to honor one whose acts shed imperishable luster on American Baha'i community, impelled share with National Assembly expenses of erection of monument in symbolic spot, the meeting place of East and West, to both of which she unsparingly dedicated the full force of her mighty energies. I am speechless, speechless. What a lady, what a lady. This is a life, dear friends, we need to study. And in any aspect of our life, try to our best of abilities, try to some degree emulate. Abdul Baha is on a league beyond. This is a lady that at least we could study her, also her life, and hope and pray that we could do services and sacrifice and work to become more and more of a teacher of the cause of God. That love, that fire, that energy. What a lady, truly. So carrying on. So I'm not going to reread everything we read. That would be tiresome. So then in paragraph 33, it mentions chief pillar of that future house, a house which posterity will regard as the last refuge of a tottering civilization. Remember I mentioned that? The chief pillar. And what did I mention that was? I mentioned it was the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. So let's look at this. This chief pillar of that future house, a house which posterity will regard as the last refuge of a tottering civilization, mentioned in paragraph 33, was the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States of America. And this is in Baha'i News. This is, and I had the privilege to read the whole thing, all Baha'i News. So one day I was just kind of sat down. Actually, it was more than one day, so quite many pages. But I read the whole thing, and this is from Baha'i News number 86. It says, in a world writhing with pain and declining into chaos, this American Baha'i community, the vanguard of the liberating forces of Baha'u'llah, succeeded in the years following Abdul Baha's passing in raising high above the institutions established by its sister communities in East and West, what may well constitute the chief pillar of that future house, a house which posterity will regard as the last refuge of a tottering civilization. And yes, my dear Surush John, there's no diacritics in Abdul Baha, and the reason is because it's a direct quote from the Baha'i News. So I'm well aware of many places that I don't put diacritics. So that is...
Got it.
So if the quote itself doesn't have it, even though obviously Abdul Baha needs its accents and everything, I didn't put them there. So this chief pillar, so let's have a reading. Scott, could you kindly read this? This is from a letter of the Supreme Body, Universal House of Justice, and this is in 1966. If you could read this one for us.
The Universal House of Justice, which the Guardian said would be regarded by posterity as, quote, the last refuge of a tottering civilization, quote, unquote, is now, in the absence of the Guardian, the sole infallibility guided institution in the world to which all must turn, and on it rests the responsibilities for ensuring the unity and progress of the cause of God, in accordance with the revealed word. These are statements from the Master, and and the Guardian, indicating that the Universal House of Justice, in addition to being the highest legislative body of the faith, is also the body to which all must turn, and is the apex of the Baha'i administrative order, as well as the supreme organ of the Baha'i Commonwealth. The Guardian has in his writings specified for the House of Justice, such fundamental functions as the formulation of future worldwide teaching plans, the conduct of the administrative affairs of the faith, and the guidance, organization, and unification of the affairs of the cause throughout the world. Furthermore, in God Passes By, the Guardian makes the following statement, quote, the Kitabi Akdas not only preserves for posterity the basic laws and ordinances in which the fabric of his future world order must rest, but ordain, in addition to the function of the interpretation which it confers upon his successor, the necessary institutions through which the integrity and unity of his faith can alone safeguard, unquote. He has also, in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, written that the members of the Universal House of Justice, and not the body of those who either directly or indirectly elect them, have been made the recipients of the divine guidance, which is at once the lifeblood and ultimate safeguard of this revelation.
Excellently read. Thank you, Scott. So there we are. The Universal House of Justice, the last refuge of a tottering civilization. Okay, didn't want to go into it, but let's go. Just checking our time. Did you have a hand, dear Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out some trivia here.
Please.
The Guardian, I understood. I had was lucky enough to know an archivist from Springfield, Illinois, and as you know, Wilmette, Illinois, where the House of Justice, the National Spiritual Assembly, is situated. It was incorporated, and the archivist the Baha'i archivist in Springfield, which is the capital of Illinois, was helping incorporate the Baha'i papers in the Abraham Lincoln Library, and all of the incorporation papers and all the papers that go into all the rules, the conduct, and things like that you see are actually in the Illinois State Archives, because they were incorporated. They have to be in all of the incorporation papers. These are the papers that were ultimately used as a blueprint for many of the other national spiritual assemblies in the world. Where things, there is obviously going to be some rule changes, but the basics were interesting. So it's not just in the Baha'i archives, but it's in actually the state of Illinois archives. Kind of a side note that when I lived in Springfield and I knew my friend that was there, he's passed on now, but he literally had them in his hands when he was working with the state. So
wow. Yeah, those will be for,
right.
Hopefully they're well protected and preserved.
Oh yeah.
Because those are very important documents in the scheme of time. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Scott. Thank you. So then we continue in paragraph 34. If you remember, this is now the beloved Guardian is talking about these attacks, and from that came from outside the faith and within inside the faith. And he mentions this attack from this individual called a besotted woman. And this was, so I read this once more to, make you remember what we were talking about. It says, the veiled attacks with which a handful of deluded enthusiasts subsequently sought in the pages of their periodical to check the growth and blight the prospects of an infant administration, had likewise failed to achieve their purpose. The attitude which a besotted woman later on assumed, her ludicrous assertions, her boldness in flouting the will of Abdul Baha and in challenging its authenticity, and her attempts to subvert its principles were again powerless to produce the slightest breach in the ranks of its valiant upholders. So, besotted woman. So who is this woman that has become defiled, and become, per se, spiritually dirty in that sense, become filthy? Who is this lady? Let's find out. Here she is. Her name was Ruth White, okay? She was an American Baha'i, and later covenant breaker, she charged that the will and testament of Abdul Baha was a forgery. And something that the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi said, that even the enemies of the faith in the Holy Land, he didn't question. It was so categorically clear. It was in the handwriting of Abdul Baha. Even the enemy said, it's Abdul Baha's, but she had the audacity and temerity to say that the will and testament of Abdul Baha was a forgery. And this is that periodical that was mentioned by the beloved guardian. It says, is the Baha'i organization the enemy of the Baha'i religion? And she distributed it herself. In 1930, the Baha'i World Union was formed in Germany by covenant breaker Wilhelm Hergel as a result of the activities of Ruth White. And she renewed her activities in 1940 with no result. She lived to the ripe old age of 100, and she became a devotee of Meher Baba. So that is factoids on this lady, this besotted woman, as according to the beloved guardian. And her activities became naught, as they say. It was a total and absolute failure. So let me see what this is. Is this a video? No, I think that's my last slide. So there we are. That's it, my dear friends. That was the period from 1913 to 1923. So per se, part 7 of our America and the Most Great Peace. Next week, we're going to cover the last period, 1923 to 1933. And as you all know, 1933 was when it was written. So it's the last period, historical period. Then we should, our following week after that, we will jump back into Advent. So this will be one more session of America, the Most Great Peace, covering the last decade, so that now we will have a fuller picture of the real challenges. When we read that one paragraph of Advent to Divine Justice saying the early American Baha'i community went through tests and trials and challenges, now you understand the history of this, the real sufferings and challenges. They didn't have anything. They didn't have translations. They didn't have any writings. They didn't have material means. They didn't have many teachers. And even the one teacher that really came, per se, Ibrahim Khairullah, he was per se making it all up on himself. And then he became a covenant breaker. So they didn't have a lot of things to go on. So what a challenging community. But then the energies that and the guidance of Abdul Baha, when he sent his ambassadors, his 4 messengers, to really bring in this new energy into this American Baha'i community, restore the unity. And then his injection of divine energy of the tablets of the divine plan is literally like the power of God striking the American Baha'i community and giving it spiritual destiny and saying, this land, this American continent has a destiny. And then that energy poured out and the pioneers went forth. So it's really cool. Just with that injection also came these weeds in that analogy I said, that in energy and infusion, these weeds trying to root their head up and say, I'm something, look at me, and the ego trying to play on themselves. But what happened? The power that is generated from this new life almost crushed and made these weeds turn to dust. And because they could not, the light they were was being radiated literally. See how my hand is absorbing the light? You see that? Because they had submitted their will to him. But if you raise your hands up and thinking you are important, there's no light. But if you submit, the light is on your hands and on the being. So this is literally how these American Baha'i community was. They submitted lovingly, obediently to the will of the Lord. And they grew like a tree, like a flower. But these covenant breakers, they raised their head thinking, I am something important. But they withered and turned to dust. That's an analogy, but you can see how it ties to these trials and tribulations and sufferings of the American Baha'i. Very good, dear friends. We're getting, that was our last part. I toss it over to questions at this point in time, or thoughts, suggestions. If any of you have any questions, I wasn't really engaging in the chat. I'm sure there may have been questions, I missed it. Oh, so many funny comments.
There were quite a few comments, but it's okay. You know, the biggest question I have is, would when you were talking about Martha Root and her resting place, that is part of the endowment of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is as well, or is that? It's
in Hawaii, in Honolulu. So it's part of, I believe it's under the protection of the National Spiritual Assembly of Hawaii. Because the National Spiritual Assembly of Hawaii is overseeing and protect under their, I believe, don't quote me on it, but I believe it because it's in Honolulu. So it's a different National Spiritual Assembly overseeing that one.
And is that artifact actually, is there an erected edifice that's there?
That was the resting place. That's the monument. When you say artifact, it's a monument. The headstone, gravestone, that was what was erected from the sum that the beloved guardian even sent, was that resting place for Martha Root, was that headstone for Martha Root. Yeah. Any other questions, Jeremiah?
I wanted to say that Meher Baba, who was mentioned in the final slide,
sure,
I believe is a Sufi, I think. Because
I don't know much about Meher Baba either. All I know is Baba means father. That's all about all I know about Meher Baba. But
yeah, I think he's a Sufi. So that's Ruth White.
She was, yeah, I also, dear friends, I mentioned several characters because I want to give a historical analysis as well as a overviewing study of the text, not just do a shallow review, whether it's of Advent, Divine Justice, America, the Most Great Peace. I also want to be comprehensive. And I may, mention different individuals that became covenant breakers, attacked the faith. I categorically don't want any of the friends to go and look these people up in the sense of, I want to go read their writings or find out what they say or what they say. This is something that will pervert your heart and your minds because their writings and viewpoints are very distortionary. What I want to be very clear is, as mentioned by the beloved guardian in America, the Most Great Peace, how they write and how they tie truth with falsehood. So they might start off talking very nicely and praising the faith. And you might actually accidentally click on a website that happens to be one of their websites. That's why we have to be, in this day and age, more protection of our eyes, our hearts, and our minds, because it's literally like a battlefield sometimes. The internet is even. But they may clothe their writings with truth. So it may look very nice. And it's like, oh, yeah, this is a very nice thing. But then they weave what seems to be something not quite right. And even though, because you've read truths, you may not even pick up on that. And then they start doing every so often challenges, whether it's to the institutions or the central figures or even to principles of the faith. And so what happens is, because your mind has now accepted the original, the truths, you're as you continue reading, you are now starting that level of certitude, your heart starts getting impacted. And so what happens is this is seed, this poisonous seed of doubt, which is the opposite of Iran, which is certitude, right? So this poisonous seed of doubt enters into your heart. Now this cannot go away because you cannot unlearn something, right? It's in there. So every time when you mention something, for example, whether it's on an individual in the faith, that comes up. Now you suddenly think, oh, okay, that one. But what about that and that? I read this and that, or I heard about this and that and that. And if you continue to reading that, you're now feeding that doubt. And that will spring forth, and you could either be lost to the faith, or you could turn even to the dark side, as they say. And this is the reality. This is something that why it is injuncted so many times in the writings. Protect yourself, watch out, because our hearts are very delicate. We're little flowers, but they're very, very insidious weeds that are trying to trammel the flowers. We have to be on guard. And the entire Advent to Divine Justice, when we get into it, really get into it, it's about protection of our spiritual armor. So when we go forth into the teaching, all these dark forces, which we're really going to be studying about, will not impact us and turn us into a dark force ourselves. You follow? So this is really, it's about to become the new race of man. This is what His Holiness Baha'u'llah wants us to become, a new creation. Any other thoughts, my dear friends? This is because this theme that I'm mentioning right now is an overarching theme of the whole revelation of Baha'u'llah, to become a transformed mankind, a new race of man. So this is something that is really what the essence of Advent to Divine Justice is, to become a new race of man. So all these terrible, terrible, afflictive poisons in our country, namely racism, materialism, corruption in this country, we as the Baha'i community, this new fledgling community, armor ourselves with rectitude of conduct, chaste and holy life, and freedom of racial prejudices, so that our Baha'i community will not only be transformed, but stand apart, be a beacon of light, and then be able to carry forth this light to the greater society. This is what is called the Double Crusade. Not only a transformation of our Baha'i community internally, but taking that light to the greater society. So this is what the beloved guardian says, and he really hammers what this rectitude of conduct is, this aspect of justice is, what this chaste and holy life is, and what freedom from racial prejudices is. And he explains it in detail in Advent to Divine Justice. And we're going to get into that, and I love it, and it's going to be so exciting. But the real point is, the most important point of all of it is this work that we got to do to become this new race of man. Okay? So that's really what this overarching theme is. And why I've tied it all to American the Most Great Peace is to show you that we're standing on some great shoulders in this, we're standing on some incredible Baha'is that held this faith together during some really hard and tough times. And I didn't want to discount it by just reading, a few words in paragraph 16 of Advent to Divine Justice and say, this American Baha'i community went through tests, trials, and tribulations. That's why I wanted to segue, showing the history to understand that we are standing on incredible shoulders that have done incredible things in the history of this early American Baha'i community. And we have a lot of work to do to honor those, per se, shoes that we got to fill. And so that's really where I want to leave it for today. If there's any other questions, we're at 3:55. We generally close at 4. So 4 Central. I know some of you are in Eastern. So if there's any questions before we close, and then we can have our closing prayer. And thank you very much to every one of you. It's been a true pleasure as always. And keep up with the reading. So keep up with the reading. So next week, we're going to continue finishing up America, the Most Great Peace. Then we're going to get into paragraph 16. Okay, we're going to jump back into paragraph 16 of Advent of Divine Justice. Okay, so stay caught up, and then you'll know exactly where we are. Okay, very good. Thank you, everyone.
O my God, thou seest me in my lowliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the breath of the Holy Spirit? Help me to triumph by the host of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all people, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent and the doer of whatsoever thou willest.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week.